Hello guys, finally after so many delays and just timing everything, I'm finally gonna review all the Matrix films, at least up to this point. And it's five, not four, five, because I am gonna include the Animatrix, because even though that's technically a little different than the other four, it's still, in my opinion, a very important movie to include with this franchise. So, how I've done these, I'm just gonna go through all of them, all five of them. In a row, pretty much. This is gonna be a longer one, so bear with me. We're gonna start with the first one. The first one came out in 1999. It's 2 hours and 16 minutes long, and it's rated R. It has 8.7 out of 10 on IMDb with about 1.9 million-ish user votes on the It has 73% on Metacritic with 252 critics. It was directed by the Wachowski siblings. When the movie was made, they were the Wachowski brothers, and then over time they transitioned into the other gender. For a while, not siblings, Wachowski sisters. Because for a while one transitioned while the other was still their original gender, and then they transitioned to the same gender. So yeah, I just say siblings just for simplicity's sake. But yeah, and they also wrote it. As a side note, it stars Keanu Reeves, who was in Speed. We'll just say Speed, and Lawrence Fishburne, who was in he was in stuff, but for the life of me, I can't remember. I'll just say that what was that movie? That Tina Turner biography movie. What's Love Got to Do with It? He was in that. He played Ike. Um, Start with those two. All right. So, and since these movies have the same leads, there's just I won't get too much into that stuff. I'll just kind of keep moving with that. On Rotten Tomatoes, the movie has 88% by critics with 159 critics and 85% by audience with 250,000 ish audience people. Critics' consensus: thanks to the Wachowskis' imaginative vision, The Matrix is a smartly crafted combination. I'm going to move this here. Uh, Combination of spectacular action and groundbreaking special effects. Yeah, yeah, definitely. Movie is available to stream on HBO Max. It's available to rent and buy on Apple TV, Google Play, Amazon, YouTube, Vudu, Microsoft Store, Redbox, DirecTV, Amazon, AMC On Demand, and it's available to rent only on Charter Spectrum. And it was weird. I couldn't find a specific DVD release for this. It was released on VHS in September of '99, and it said after its DVD first seen. Okay, so I assume that the DVD release probably came out probably around the same time as the VHS, because DVDs were starting to become more of a common thing in the late '90s. So we'll go with that. um, I guess my over thoughts about this film. You see, my Corey, my wife, she loves these movies, and she showed them to me. We watched all of these before seeing um, the Matrix Revolution. So we saw that at home through HBO on demand. We didn't go to theaters to see it. That's why I didn't do movie theater reviews on that. Let's see, where is But yeah, the biggest thing about this movie, in my opinion, that really stood out to me is it's hard. It's the Matrix. It's just one of those things where I kind of get the criticism. A lot of people said that, in hindsight, I've heard a lot of people say that the original maybe a little overrated, and it's a bit too talky and a bit pretentious. But I don't know. When I first saw it, I mean, I think another thing you might do when this movie came out, like, it was one of those films that was everywhere all the time and was parodied everywhere, so everyone was constantly reminded of the Matrix and rip off movies and cash grab films based around that idealism and that kind of thing. I think that kind of turned a lot of people off to the film. I think when you scrape all that shit away and you just look at the film in itself, it is a really well put together movie. I will say though, it's weird. I don't think dialogue's a weak point. It's a weird point, if that makes any sense. Because the characters, the first one, the dialogue's handled well for the most part. Second and third, it gets a little rough. But here's the thing: Neil was never. To me, Neil was always. He had the most depth in this movie because it literally was a fish out of water. So, 2 and 3, his depth kind of eases a little bit. He becomes more of the Jesus Christ figure, which makes sense. But I don't know. Keanu Reeves took a character that was a bit plain Jane on paper, and he gave him a lot of soul, which made him, in my opinion, and this is a true talent of an actor. When an actor can take a character that doesn't have a lot of depth to them and make them feel in depth just through sheer acting ability and believability alone, and that Keanu Reeves did that with this role, especially later on. And this one, they give him enough to work with where it doesn't feel completely like that. And that's the thing. And I will say this: these early Matrix movies, they oozed and breathed late '90s, early 2000s, which I grew up with. So it was definitely a nostalgia hit for me, watching these movies and seeing those influences in those films. Um, Overall, I still think it's a classic. I think the dialogue holds up well. The action CGI, that's a no-brainer. I mean, again, I think the only issue with the film that I think people have trouble with in hindsight is the dialogue and how characters talk. It's a little bit, chosen one story kind of thing. But I don't know. To be honest, I think if we're gonna talk about chosen one stories, I think I think this one does a little bit of a better job of like not being too cliche driven as opposed to something like Harry Potter. I feel like Harry Potter kind of borderlines that a lot in their films, and they kind of get away with it because everything else is because the films overall are so well executed consistently. Well, Matrix films arguably aren't, but I think Neil himself, I think was handling a lot of this because Keanu Reeves, when he started playing, he was a full fledged actor. I mean, Daniel Radcliffe, he started acting as Harry when he was a little kid. So there's some differences there too that you can't really criticize about. But yeah, I'll talk more about these films as towards the end, but I'm gonna keep it moving here. So the next one, its sequel. Matrix Reloaded here. Like I said, it's good. All right, so here we go. Matrix Reloaded came out in 2003. So what they did was they took 4 years and they made two films and released them in the same year. So it was like the whole thing in one go. So there was 4 years where it was just the original Matrix, and that kind of what built the isms of that over time. This film has 7.2 out of 10 on IMDb with about 585,000-ish user votes. It has a 62% on Metacritic with 180 critics. It stars and directed everything by the same people, so I'm not going to get into that. Rotten Tomatoes, 73% by audiences. It is certified fresh with 244 critics. 72% by audience with 250,000-ish audience people. Critics' consensus, though its heady themes and are a departure from its predecessor, The Matrix Reloaded is a worthy sequel packed with popcorn-friendly thrills. On streaming, it's available on HBO Max. Actually, it's the exact same thing as the original Matrix. Same rent and buy availability, even down to it just being available for rent on Charter Spectrum. When it was released on DVD in 2003. So this one, it's weird. On one hand, I think in terms of just sheer action, I think this film has more of it, and it's done really well. So the action in the first movie was done really well too. Of course, but this one it stepped it up a notch. Now dialogue. it works and it does well. But here's the thing: the first film, the philosophy was new and complex at the time, but it was weird. They overthought it enough. They overthought enough where you could kind of follow it and you can think for yourself, and then at a point you could go further with it if you wanted to. But this film, they really they really just assume that you read the handbook and they're just going over everything about that kind of philosophy. And it can feel a bit overwhelming. And there are moments where I'm just like, they included shit in this film where I'm just like, really included that here? Okay. I mean, just like weird, like little isms. I'm just like, yeah, that's definitely. Imagine going in your family to going with some siblings or whatever, watch the new Matrix movie with the family, and then some of this shit pops up. It's just, I'm not gonna say it here just because I want the element of surprise for people who haven't really watched it, but yeah, it's wolf. Um, but overall, it does leave on a good cliffhanger though for three, which it was kind of a thing though, and this isn't the first film to kind of do something like that. The Back to the Future films did a similar thing back in the late '80s, early '90s. Yeah, overall, this is a good, solid movie. I don't think it's better than the first one. I mean, to be honest, it's not really a spoiler. None of these films, arguably except for maybe Animatrix, I could argue are as good as the original. I don't think any of them are better though. I think the reason why this one, like I said, I just feel like they overthought the dialogue in it. They went too far with it, and I think they kind of lost some people with the philosophy a little bit, where it's just like, okay, now it just feels, because in the first one, like I said, they took it far enough. And they left it at a point where you could go further with it if you wanted to, but it wasn't forced on it. This one, they just so much, like there's points where it's just like, good lord. Like if you weren't having a good day, or if you had a minor headache and you put this on, you'd just be like, like, it's like, well, hold on a minute, kind of stuff. I mean, but yeah, so good one. Now let's move on to the third one, the infamous third one. And I don't remember when Animatrix was released, but for the sake of simplicity, I'll probably review that after the third one, and then go into the fourth one, because those four were kind of released around the same time, roughly. But yeah, so Matrix Revolutions. Oh boy, this one they just kind of really kind of lost touch here. This is definitely, in my opinion, arguably this is probably the worst one in the franchise, to be honest, technically. But here's the thing, though, I don't think it's necessarily a bad movie. But here, this one came out in same year, 2003, a bit later on. It's 2 hours and 9 minutes, is rated R. Has 6.7 out of 10 on IMDb with about 505,000 ish user votes. It's weird. The first move on a quick side note, on IMDb they have a popularity thing with how many people have viewed and rated or whatever they did with it. The first one was down a bit. 2 and 3 they're actually up, which I find interesting that they're like that. But otherwise, movie has 47% on Metacritic with the 262 critics. On Rotten Tomatoes, the movie has 35% by critics with 217 critics, and 60% by audience without 250,000 audience people. And the critics' consensus: a disappointing conclusion to the Matrix trilogy, as characters and ideas take a backseat to the special effects. And it's the same availability. Nothing's different with this from the previous two. And it was released on DVD actually in the spring of 2004, so it came out a bit later into the next year. So yeah, and it's weird because I actually didn't really look at the when I watched these films with Corey. I didn't really look at like those numbers beforehand, so I kind of watched them without. I mean, usually watch these films, the numbers don't usually influence like how I see them as much as just kind of make sense of like, oh yeah, yeah, I remember this thing. This thing mentioned that thing was going to happen in this film. And I see. I'm like, okay, I can see why that could be an issue. That kind of thing. Um, this film, I I didn't need to. I know what the problem was. You see, the problem with the film was it made a lot of traditional third film mistakes. The big conclusion films that they introduced a lot of characters that weren't in previous films that no one knew about, and there wasn't a lot of time to learn anything about them other than they have a job they really have to do to help beat the evil thing to save like the group, and it's just a lot of that shit. And you're barely. I mean, this isn't a spoiler. You're barely in the Matrix in this film. Like, this is the first film in the franchise where a majority of the focus is in the real world at that time. And I have to say that too. That the second one did do that a bit more than the first one for sure. But I don't know, the first one when they did outside stuff host the Matrix, they did a really good job with that balance and feel of it. The second one, they still did good. They kind of upped the ante a little bit, but I think they still had that balance despite maybe getting a little too that this one they went way too like real world stuff. Like you barely see the Matrix at all. And to be honest, I kind of think the biggest downfall of this film by far is like really the whole franchise in general is overthinking, which is ironic. But it's not so much that they overthought with the stories and stuff. Is that they kind of got. I feel like they kind of got lost with their fan base and going super far with it, and they let it get into the films. I feel like when they made the first one, they knew that it was good enough to introduce the ideas in some past, but they didn't necessarily have to explore every single atom and detail of it on film. They could let people do it themselves. I feel like in the second and the third one, they definitely went along those lines. Now, granted, in this one, um, like I said, despite the dialogue isms of it, for some reason, there's more action in this one. And the special effects are fine. But like I said, and it's weird. It's not so much. That's the thing. The first one has more dialogue than two and three, but it handled it the best. It paced it and spread it out with the action the best. This two and three, especially three. But two had an issue with that too. Now I think about it, is that it wasn't so much there was more talking and less action, or more. There was definitely more action and maybe not as much talking. But during the segments where they did talk, a good chunk of the time it was just like this. It's just like there's a lot of moments like that where it's just like, okay, sure, maybe not a lot, but this one had some. However, I will say this, and I can't believe I forgot to mention him. A big character in this franchise, Agent Smith, played by Hugo Weaving. He is definitely he makes these movies just as much as anyone else. Like that character and him alone, like make the watchability films increase by like a bunch, because he performs the character with such a unique undertone that makes it very memorable and makes it very fun to watch. And he was definitely my favorite character to watch in these films, for sure. I think the only and the third film, he really kind of helped carry it a little bit, but second one and first one definitely as well. I mean, I think, but like I said, like, and I'm gonna give bonus recognition for, I can't say it without giving anything away, but there's a character that there's an actor that has to act as a different character in the movie, and he does an incredibly brilliant job with it. And I'm gonna give, and he deserves some honorary credit for that. But yeah, this film, and it's weird. I'm not even mad about how it ends. It's just, I just wish they didn't do so much real world shit. I just wish they did more stuff in the Matrix world again. I think they got, I think they got too, and that's a thing too. There probably could have been like spin-off novels or stuff like that that probably maybe explored these characters in this film a bit more to give them more background, but and not everyone did their homework. And if people nowadays, if they're getting into these films, how would they know? Ooh, sorry. I don't know. We still got two more things to talk about. I'm getting way too wrapped up in this. Well, besides, we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But first, let's see. Yeah, Animatrix came out in 2003, so I assume that this one probably came out right after the third movie, or maybe I don't think it came out between 2 and 3. That's too tight of a hole, and I don't think it came out before 2. I don't know. It doesn't matter. It was the same freaking year, close enough. All right, almost have it here. Okay. Okay, so Animatrix. This one came out in 2003. I think this might have come out between 1 and 2. I don't know. Because it was. Spoiler, it was released on DVD in the summer of 03. So if second and third came out in the fall of 03 and then the spring of 04, then this one must have come out between 1 and 2. So technically I probably should have reviewed this one after the first one, but it doesn't matter because it's like it's Animatrix, it's whatever. But yeah, like I said, it came out in 2003. It's unrated, but yeah, don't think this is for kids by any stretch. It's an hour 40 long, has 7.3 out of 10 on IMDb without 78,000 issues or votes. Nothing on Metacritic, surprisingly. It's directed by a bunch of segments, but it was overhauled. It was overviewed by the Wachowskis, so I'll give them credit there. Some voice actors, but I'll give credit to Keanu Reeves and Carrie Ann Moss also get some credit here, and of course. Oh, geez, so many people. Who's been playing Trinity in these films? She's also known for. She's also in Memento, that movie. On Rotten Tomatoes, the movie has 89% actually, but only 18 critics though, so not fully like official. But it has 78% by audiences with about 100,000 ish audience people. No consensus here on the Just Watch app, HBO Max, but some slight difference here. It is available to rent and buy on Apple TV, Amazon, Google Play, YouTube, Vudu, Microsoft Store, DirecTV, and Redbox. But it's not. It's a little different than the other 3 films. And it was released on DVD in 2003, like I said. Like I said, this is probably it's definitely better. I think it's better, definitely better than 3. Pretty much all of them in a franchise are better than 3. I think better than 2. And here's the thing: the reason why I think this is the second best movie is one, it's a very great anthology film. Two, it explores so much aspects of the Matrix through all these different art styles that are so brilliantly put together. And three, it's incredibly for covering so much weirdness and so much different philosophies and the timeline and everything. It's a very palatable experience. Like you could comprehend and be invested in all these stories very well. Um, I think this is definitely a hidden gem, in my opinion, a hidden gem film, especially within the franchise, because I don't hear a lot of people talk about this when they think about the Matrix. And this film is just as much canon as anything else because it's talking about that world and people that the Matrix affects, and it's an important thing to cover. And all the art styles and stuff. Now, I do remember some people loving some art styles and maybe not caring for others, but I think that's pretty common. But yeah, this is an animated movie, but each story has different animation styles, and yes, some you may like more than others. That's just typical taste. That's not something to get too upset about or unexpected or anything. But yeah, overall, I really dug this one, definitely for sure. And I think this is probably, if I had to rate the best so far, and the new one we'll talk about in a little bit, but so far it's the original is the best in my opinion, followed by this one, then Reloaded, and then Revelations. Some people might flip flop to an Animatrix, but it just depends. But yeah, now we're on to like the most recent one. Yeah, this one here. All right, so this one came out 2021. It's 2 hours and 28 minutes long. This might be the longest of the movies, to be honest. It's rated R as well. Has 5.7 on IMDb with about 224,000 ish user votes, and has 63% on Metacritic with about 345 critics. It's only directed by one of the Wachowski siblings. The other one didn't return, so it's a little bit of a split there. Um, it stars Kananu and Carrie. They come back from the other ones. There's some differences too, and we'll get to that in a little bit. The movie has 63% on Rotten Tomatoes with 345 critics and 64% by audience with about 2,500-ish audience people. Critics' consensus, the first one. If it lacks the original's bracing original craft, The Matrix Resurrections revisits the world of the franchise with a timely perspective and heart. Audience consensus, The Matrix Resurrections falls short compared to the original, but doesn't skimp on the action or cool visual effects. Okay. And it's available to stream on actually a few, HBO Max, HBO DirecTV, and Charter Spectrum. It's available to buy only on Apple TV, Amazon, Google Play, YouTube, Vudu, Microsoft Store, Redbox, DirecTV, and AMC On Demand. This movie came out in like late 2021. So, and it was released. It's gonna be released on DVD in 2022. So that already came out on DVD recently, of course. So this film, and pretty much The Matrix in a nutshell here. It's kind of funny. I can understand why people may see this as the worst Matrix film because it does. I'm just gonna say this. Compared to the other movies, I think this movie has the least impressive action, in my opinion. And I've seen all these films once, so it might take me another viewing or two of these films to kind of fully, get a good full comparison. But based on my knowledge and memory, The action in this film isn't bad. I think the problem is that those early Matrix movies set a new standard for action, and so many movies after those films duplicated and did all different things with it. By the time that they came back to this franchise and they revisited it, like they still did the established stuff, which is fine because that's the style. But it's already been done a gajillion times, and it's not their fault. It's just something we're overly familiar with. Now, it doesn't mean it's bad. I'm just saying, but I don't think there's a lot of instances where I'm like, oh wow, this is something I haven't seen before. Even when I watched the old ones, like recently, like a while ago, the stuff in these films, even to this day, just feel memorable and stand out. This film, any average Joe, not me, an average Joe who watches this film, I don't know how much of the action they'll pick up. Now, in terms of writing and dialogue, this might be one of the better installments because they kind of knew to kind of polish things up a little bit and kind of make it a little bit more understandable with certain things. And it's kind of weird too, but the philosophy element gets talked about a decent amount early on in the film, but as things get going, it doesn't really stick around. Like a good chunk of this film is kind of focused on something that's actually quite simple, and it's not necessarily like hugely earth shattering like in the other films. It's kind of kept kind of simple, which is oddly refreshing. But then it like, kind of leaves you to wonder, like after this film, like okay, what's next for this franchise? You know, like what's the next thing? Um, but yeah, in terms of like overall ingredients to this film, I think though it's weird. I think, I think the dialogue is better for the most part. I think some of the tongue in cheek meta stuff might have been great for the moment, but I feel like in hindsight and over time, I don't know if it's gonna age the best. But I get what they were trying to do, and I appreciate it. But it's gonna be hard to say how well that holds up. Because that's the other thing too. The original Matrix film, even though it was definitely late '90s isms, in a lot of ways it kind of feels timeless because technology in itself is become something that we can't in all our lives envision ourselves without. So technology in itself has become a timeless thing, despite not really being a full thing throughout human history. In fact, a small minority of it's been a thing in history of anything, really. Um, yeah, I think overall in the films, I have to say some people think this is the worst. I don't think so. All right, I will admit. I mean, even though the third one has its problems, you still see the Matrix characters. You still see Lawrence Fishburne. You still see Hugo Weaving. This film, outside of Keanu and Carrie Ann, like everyone else is either new characters or kind of recasted-ish a little bit. I'm just gonna say this. There was moments where I kind of wish they had kept some of the original guys, because while I can appreciate like the actors that I'm trying to work and put a new spin on some characters, I kind of almost wish they got some of the originals back because I don't know. I just kind of feel like that newer actors just I don't know. I feel like if you're gonna play like the next version of a character, I feel like you should keep the isms of those characters when you go through. And some of the recast characters, they actually did it pretty decently, but then there's some I'm just kind of like, okay, at first you kind of were, but now I kind of feel like you're kind of ditching it a little bit. You're just kind of doing your own thing. And at that point, I almost would prefer if it was just an original character to begin with, you know? But, like I said, I might need a second viewing, but I think overall, I think what makes this one, oh, sorry, I keep yawning. What makes this one a step up compared to Revolutions is that when shit comes to shit and when things get going, they keep it simple. And I can appreciate that and I kind of like that. Revolutions it was the third film, and I will say this about Revolutions: it felt like a third film in a good way. Like you felt like everything was concrete, conclusive isms, and I appreciate that. It felt like a good like bookend. It just it relied too much on like I wouldn't say cliches, but like typical third stuff that. Oh man, that we've seen before. And I think this film overall would have benefited if it maybe like didn't if it like I said just kept it Matrix and didn't try to do like this real world stuff that was in that world, because even though it was interesting to a degree, I mean we already explored it plenty in the second film. The first two films. I mean, how much is there left outside of characters that you haven't explored the whole franchise and now you're just going to dedicate this movie towards? It's just oof. And the thing, this film really doesn't. Overall, I think this film does a good job. I think some of the Matrix soul and spirit is a bit missing from the film. That's the best way I can put it. Like, there's some little stuff to analyze in the film, but I think overall, this compared to the other Matrix films, it feels like this film, like it still has enough to say, oh, this is a Matrix movie, but you still feel like there's some stuff that was kind of taken out, some of its soul that was taken out, something new was put in, and you're not sure if it was good or bad, and we may not, but I will say this: I do think overall it's better than Revolutions. By a little bit, not by a lot. I mean, I could rewatch all those films and in my opinion may change. But yeah, overall, the Matrix franchise, man, talk about. And I dare say this is one of those franchises where it was a lot more influential than I think a lot of people nowadays tend to think about. I feel like these films brought a lot of like in terms of special effects and action, a lot in terms of like thinking about like what if life's a computer simulation and all that stuff. It really brought that too, and that really, I mean, even like clothing and art styles that was a huge thing too. And I think at the end of it, it's kind of hard to like imagine like a lot of stuff without those films influencing the path that other stuff kind of went on. But yet you don't hear a lot of people talk about it. I think that's because the movie was only really like relevant for like 3 to 5 years in popular culture before it kind of faded. It kind of Lord of the Rings did a little bit. The only difference was I feel like this film franchise, in all honesty, I think if they did the third film a lot better, I think they would have extended its influence a bit. But I think by the time people saw the third film and saw kind of the end result, I think they just kind of felt a little gypped. And I think some people were just like, oh, come on, that's how it's going to end after all that? Come on. And that's the thing, it's not so much the way it ends that bothers me, it's how the movie goes about showing it. I just kind of have a problem with, like, why would we spend all this time with these characters I barely know, and I'm not going to learn more about after the movie, I'm not going to learn anything during because they're doing shit, and I didn't learn anything before, so why should I care now? I mean, at this point, keep the focus on the characters I do know. Or if you're gonna introduce a new character, put all the new character energy in that one or two characters and call it good, as opposed to dividing up between like 5 to 7. I mean, good lord. And this one does a better job of introducing stuff. Even really all of these movies outside of the third one did a good job of introducing like a decent amount of characters without feeling overdrawn. But yeah, overall, I would say if I wouldn't skip any of them, I would watch all of them. But you will have favorites, and there will be some that you will like more than others. Animatrix to me is my personal, like, one of my hidden gem favorites of the franchise, but some of you may prefer 2, 3, or 4. I mean, the first one, most people argue that the first one's the best one, though I can see some people who may have a hard on for more action stuff as opposed to like the dialogue driven. They may prefer number 2, which is reasonable enough. But yeah, overall, I think this is a really good franchise, and I wouldn't mind to see them do another movie. I just think that if they're gonna, sorry, jeez, if they're gonna do another one, I think they almost have to really, really think about what makes these films successful and what doesn't. Because they can't keep beating a dead horse, but at the same time, they can't just do a bunch of new stuff and then just act like, oh, this is our thing now, and then have everyone love and accept it. They kind of have to respect the idea that the franchise established certain things, and it's kind of, and there's things that you should probably keep, for at least for a bit. But yeah, overall, definitely solid franchise, definitely solid group of films. I do recommend them for sure. But yeah, guys, thanks for watching. In case you want to chat with anyone at the Campy Company, you don't want to use the YouTube comment section, we do have a couple options. The first one is we have a Discord channel. Find a link to that in about page / about section of our channel. We also have a community tab on our channel as well. You can access that anywhere at any time. We also have a Patreon page in the works. The main goal of the page is to raise some money for the channel so we can get a bigger budget, so we can do more ambitious things, and also to start making merchandise for the channel as well. And the merchandise itself will be geared towards aspects of the channel that you guys enjoy, so any support we get for that is much appreciated. But yeah, guys, thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like the videos, and have a good day.